Hello. This edition explores the early introduction to inclusive practices in SFUSD. Because this series is focused on the staffing of special education services, this section also focuses on the union's role in the staffing process. This is an excerpt from an article written by Alicia Chu and published in the Special Edge. Titled Autism in the Classroom, One Mother's Story, it tells the powerful journey of a parent and a dedicated team of educators who helped create an inclusive learning environment for her son, Kevin. This story captures the spirit of SFUSD's early inclusion model, grounded in collaboration, courage, and the belief that all students benefit from learning together. For those who are interested, the full article is available through the link provided in the description of the video. On the right side of the slide is a bio of Dr. Ann Halverson. Dr. Halverson helped the district implement the first inclusion program. In this clip, she describes the district's nationally renowned inclusion programs, explains that early inclusion was designed for students with the most extensive needs, and discusses the role of the union. For the sake of time, the clip is heavily edited.
So there was a lot of national recognition. The grants were funded by Washington to focus on the most likely kids to be eliminated from general ed, the kids with the most extensive needs. And so that was, where it was to start. But at any rate, there is a reputation that this district once had where it was, a standout on looking at needs of kids and promoting access to general ed for all kids, not just the kids with the label inclusion. And they've lost that. And I think really it's the strength of your contracts that can bring it back. In the late 90s, the contract laid out ratios. And so unless you have it in contract, it doesn't exist. So one of the things that I've always valued is the power of our unions. And as a teacher, we all learned that. And as a paraprofessional, we all learned that firsthand.
Jeffrey Libby was the inclusion support teacher who helped coordinate services for Kevin in a general education classroom. He also founded the Inclusion Task Force, which spent 13 years building the inclusion program in SFUSD. One of its early achievements was the creation of a handbook for inclusive education. A link to that document can also be found in the description of this video. The task force included the adults closest to students, parents, teachers, paraprofessionals, related service providers, and site administrators. There was union representation. The meetings, twice a month for over a decade, ensured that concerns were immediately and constructively addressed. It was not a top-down mandate. Mainstreaming versus inclusion. What's the difference? The Handbook for Inclusive Education explained mainstreaming and inclusion in 1996, citing a board policy from 1995. Prior to the task force, mainstreaming was typically reserved for students with mild to moderate disabilities who received special education services in a mild to moderate special day class, and students with more severe disabilities had to remain in special day classes for the full day. The Inclusion Task Force changed that in a profound way. The Handbook for Inclusive Education adopted by the board ensured that staffing would remain adequate for implementation of services. It specified students of all abilities could participate in inclusion. This meant the beginning of the end of segregation of the schools, with students finally getting to know all of the other students who shared their campus. It further specified that student ratio and funding should be at least equal to the programs where the student would previously have been placed. This was crucial in preventing inclusion from morphing into a resource specialist program. And the handbook explicitly distinguished inclusion as being different than the resource specialist programs at schools. The student to staff ratio should be the same as in an SDC class. Inclusion was not the same as a resource specialist program. Those students were already included in general education for the majority of the school day, and they benefited from having pull-out services rather than push-in support. In other words, not all students would benefit from inclusion. Some still needed the resource specialist and special day class programs. For more on this, see the link to another article from the Special Edge in the video description below. In short, beginning in 1993 and lasting until 2006, the Resource Specialist program was preserved, and many students still received education in SDC classrooms. Too many, according to some parents. But here, there is the addition of an inclusion teacher. Students with the most extensive needs were receiving their services in general education classes, and the program was well staffed to meet the student needs. Before we explore that, I'd like to look at the crucial role the union played in making the early inclusion model a success for most students and teachers. UESF involvement on the task force meant language was added to the contract to protect caseloads of special education teachers and guarantee adequate staffing for services to be provided. The union understood, for example, the asterisk that noted that in the instance of a heterogeneous class size ranges shall be determined based on the basis of the most severe disability. In other words, when students from learning impaired and severely impaired caseloads were enrolled in inclusive services, the caseload would cap at the severely impaired numbers. Note, the language has since been changed to mild moderate and moderate to severe in subsequent union contracts. And today, people typically use the language most extensive needs when referring to what was once severely impaired or moderate to severe disabilities. The acronym IWEN stands for the Individual with Educational Needs. Most significant for the discussion of this video series is the language in 31.8.5 that the implementation of an inclusion program shall not be used as a way to achieve a reduction in staff. And in 31.8.6, the caseload assigned to the inclusion support team shall not exceed the class sizes specified in section 9.5.7 of the contract. This, combined with the board policy that the resource specialist program was different than inclusion, effectively meant that inclusion would be staffed at the levels of SDC classrooms. But as we shall see, that did not happen. This graph shows the growth of the inclusion program, but this didn't accommodate all students enrolled in SDC. Many remained in special day classes. Some parents were increasingly upset about that, especially since growth of the program had slowed. Summary. By 2006, 500 students previously receiving services in special day classes now received services in general education classrooms. Parents, administrators, and teachers collaborated to build a system that was sustainable. The California Department of Public Education, CDE, grows concerned. Also next. Meanwhile, an audit of special education services makes recommendations that nearly double the students on special education caseloads. And a union contract guts protections for inclusive practices.